Hey viewers, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Today I'd like to share with you guys a project that's in the works, a pretty neat project, a little unusual for what we do. We're mostly focused on high-end vintage audio equipment. This kind of qualifies as high-end vintage audio, although some might consider it sort of more of a MidFi system. But it's so cool that we sort of embarked on the project in hopes of completing it, which is in fact just a full Pioneer stack. Pioneer spec components from 1970s to be exact, and I thought I'd go over the component selection and what we're doing. So we started with with a Middle Atlantic 19-inch rack, a standard 19-inch rack rails. It's a great platform for mounting these spec components, which are generally all rack mountable, and that's one of the cool things about this system. There weren't a lot of rack mounted equipment available in the late 70s, but Pioneer sure did a wonderful job with it, and it is a really cool looking system in our opinion and worthy of the time spent on it. So in 1970, Pioneer released really the Spec 2 amplifier. That's right here. It's a 250 watt amplifier. There was a Japanese version, I believe it was called the M77. It didn't do that well in Japan, but it had a pretty big following in Europe and North America. So this is really the foundation to the system, and a really solid amplifier, well designed, fairly reliable. It's got the cool backlit meters on it. And again, a great platform to start this system. Up from there, we've got the Sg9500 Equalizer, which did not come in a rack mount, at least our version does not. So this looks like a rack mount that was maybe applied after the fact, because you can see it's essentially a bezel around the equalizer. But equalizers are super cool, so we thought it'd be part of our system. Moving up to the Spec One Preamp, a great match to the Spec 2, obviously, from the same time period, late 70s. Tons of controls, tons of flexibility, 2 phono inputs, including a level adjustment in the front, inputs for tuner aux 1 and aux 2. It's got a microphone mixing option in here, I guess if you were to record or want to use it as a PA system. And quintessential 1970s aluminum look with big heavy knobs. The volume is indented, which is kind of cool, and is specified in dBs instead of percentage or 1 to 10. So you can tell it's a real professional piece from that. Almost everything is in dBs, both the treble and the bass. That's another neat feature about this preamp. The treble has 2 ranges, 10 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz, and so does the bass, 50 and 100 hertz, with the ability to defeat the tone controls altogether. Here's some filters for both low and high. And the speaker control is kind of interesting. This allows you to sort of feed the amplifier outputs through the preamp so that you can control the speaker outputs at a speaker level rather than a line level. And I'll show you what that looks like in the back, which is fairly unusual in today's standards, but was pretty common in the 70s. I know Macintosh did this a lot, the ability to control speakers through the front panel of a preamp. Moving up to the CTF-1000 tape deck. As you can see, this one's not finished yet. We still have to refurbish, put new belts on it. Seems like we've got a bulb that's out. This will end up being a super reliable and a well-performing tape deck. It's got a really neat trap door for protecting the heads while you're not in use. You can see right here, they've got a little display window on the tape side, which flips down for when you're ready to insert the tape. Oh, hard to do with one hand. So there it is, the CTF-1000 tape deck. This was natively rack mount, or actually the rack ears look like they're applied at the end. You can see the seam right there. While the amplifier's faceplate extended all the way to the edge, on the tape deck it looks like the rack mounts were added, but very nicely added. Looks like it was designed into the unit. We've got pitch control, which is unusual for a tape deck, and analog meter counter, very typical at that period. Interestingly, even though most of the controls are here, the pause is actually a toggle sitting right here. Looks like an afterthought almost. You almost find the pause to be part of the main grouping of buttons. There's a bias setting for chromoly tapes and ferrous oxide. The EQ Dolby NR is right here. And there's a really neat test tone, 400 hertz test tone you can enable here in order to set probably your bias. So you can generate a tone prior to making a recording in order to calibrate this deck, which is neat. And the quintessential, most desirable feature of a vintage tape deck is the ability to go between tape and source. This allows you to hear what you're recording almost live. So you can monitor a recording through the playback head while you are making it. That way you don't have to rewind and see what your results are. You can actually hear them live. Great feature, and look for it in tape decks from this period. Moving up, we've got a Tx9500/2 tuner. Beautiful tuner with a big, large meter, signal and tuning meters in the back. It's a mediocre performer, but it certainly looks the part. This one also has a sort of after the fact rack mount. You can see the bezel here around it, but it really goes well with the spec components. Moving up, here's a RT707 reel-to-reel. This uses the smaller reel-to-reels. You know, this could be either way. We've got a RT909, which is an amazing tape deck, but we thought the RT707 looks a little bit more in place with the rest of the spec gear. We'll decide later. If we can get this one performing really well, we'll probably include this with this rack system. Otherwise, we'll grab the RT909 that is already restored and put it in its place. But the 707's got a smaller footprint because of the smaller reels, but it's got these really cool vertical mounted VU meters, making this tape deck fairly unusual. Then we dressed this up with period correct VU meters from Duro. These are not Pioneer. These is a different brand. We've got a separate studio quality VU meters, which really look great in this rack. As you can see, it's a great way to tie the whole thing together. And then finally, the icing on the cake, the Pioneer timer clock. Wonderful unit, super rare. This is a flip clock like most alarm clocks were in the 1970s. It is in fact Pioneer branded. You can use this timer as a sleep timer. You can use it to turn on and off the system. We're gonna see if we can backlight it so that it matches everything. I'm not sure if this had a light originally or it's just out, but that's in the works as well. We'll restore this timer and maybe even make a rack mount plate for it so that it fits in place a bit better than it just sitting on the rack. Let me give you another shot of what the whole rack looks like. Oh, one last piece here at the bottom. We happen to have this dynamic expander. It's called the RG1 dynamic expander processor. We're looking for a rack mount for this guy as well. Right now it's just sitting at the bottom of the rack. So the amplifier is already ready to go. The preamp needs some new bulbs and the control's clean, but it does in fact work. Tape deck's gonna get some belts, light bulbs, pinch rollers. Tuner's ready to rock and roll. The tape deck just needs final testing and calibration, and the clock needs some bulbs. That's about it for the scale of our project that we've embarked in. Let me show you the back real quick. Some of it is blocked a bit, but here's the back of the reel-to-reel. The connections are facing up, which is nice. The tuner has an AM antenna built into it, but it does have connections for 300 ohms and 75 ohms. And this looks like a voltage selector. Back then, a lot of these components would have been sold throughout the world, so it's nice that they have a voltage selector on some of them. The preamp, or here the tape deck, does not. Looks like it was either removed or it didn't come with it to begin with. Here's the preamp and what we discussed earlier. Your outputs from the amplifier could go into this input here, and then you could do speaker selection and division from the front controls, which is kind of nice. Here are all the switched outlets. This allows you to turn on the preamp and have every other component on the rack turn on, which is super convenient. I wish modern equipment had this instead of the 12-volt triggers. The equalizer is here, very basic setup for inputs and outputs for both tapes and main feeds. Cool little illustration here of different ways of wiring this equalizer, as well as a voltage selection, international voltage selector on the right. And then moving down to the Spec 2 amplifier, very, very simple connections, 2 sets of binding posts. Switchable impedance here from 8 to 4 ohms, and the inputs over there. So we'll probably put some side panels on this to kind of finish it up a little bit, probably made out of wood. And that's pretty much it. The full Pioneer spec rack from SkyFi Audio. Please subscribe to our channel if you like these videos, and visit us online at skyfiaudio.com, where you'll get to see mountains of equipment. Cool stuff, both vintage and modern, all fully restored. Just to give you a snapshot of the sort of things you can find in our shop. All right, viewers, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.